Wrestling and some of the good tag team matches that they had together prior and during the 1992 NWA World Tag Team Championship Tournament at the Great American Bash, in which Sting lost to Big Van Vader. And several people remember that pay-per-view based on that, and Dr. Death, Steve Williams, and Terry Bam Bam Gordy capturing the tournament as WCW Tag Team Champions. But before I keep going off of the tangent right there, Brian Pillman and Jushin Thunder Liger tore the house down night in and night out every time they faced each other. And Lord only knows how many good house shows they had. But definitely check Super Brawl 2 out if you want any type of information in regards to what Brian Pillman could bring to the ring as a high flyer and doing it with good psychology. I wish a lot of the young wrestlers today, I don't claim to be the biggest expert in pro wrestling, but you really know when a guy is working and when he's putting his best effort in and when he's trying to get inside the fan's head and he's making every move that he makes has some sort of psychological overtone to it. Super Brawl 2, Jushin Thunder Liger, Brian Pillman. Watch it and you'll know what I'm talking about. And then Brian Pillman eventually transitioned from a babyface into a heel type gimmick, and he fused with Tom Zink. Eventually had some showdowns with Scotty Flamingo, aka Raven, and for a while he's kind of stuck in Abyss. And a lot of this probably had to do with WCW's management. In my opinion, I'm not 100% sure of this, but I doubt if Cowboy Bob Watts was a big Brian Pillman fan, because Cowboy Bob Watts wanted to basically ban, and he did effectively ban over on the top rope moves, which directly affected Brian Pillman, Jushin Thunder Liger, and several of the light heavyweights in the light heavyweight championship division, in which they eventually had to abandon the whole division because it became so ludicrous with a lot of the rules that were implemented. And I think that had an effect on Brian Pillman, because one of his biggest strengths, of course, as many of you know, is doing a lot of creativity on that top rope. And without that top rope, it's really hard to classify yourself as Flying Brian. But nevertheless, after Bill Watts gone, order is restored in regards to the rules. And let's fast forward all the way to the end of 1992. WCW begins to do some experimentation with some tag teams. One of which was Steve Austin and Brian Pillman. Now, as someone who watched the evolution of this, and especially in house shows, I can tell you from firsthand knowledge, World Championship Wrestling were just trying to make this a sort of tag team that got other people over. And in my opinion, less talented wrestlers than them. But they tried to make them out as jobbers at first, and then trying to transition this tag team of Steve Austin and Brian Pillman into a heel-like team that could go more than just your regular 5 to 10 minutes, and go about 15 minutes to get these guys over. So it was kind of a transitional phase that WCW management was going over what to do with these guys. And eventually, to make a long story short, Brian Pillman and Steve Austin got themselves over, and they became the Hollywood Blondes, arguably the best tag team in the early 1990s, aside from the Steiner brothers, in World Championship Wrestling. In my opinion, they should have gotten more time. They should have gotten more energy. They should have gotten a bigger push, because this team was absolutely phenomenal. They had the gimmick. They had the music. Lord knows they had the music. Great tune. And they had the wrestling psychology to make it work. And they made it work for about a year and a half. And it was probably some of the best tag team stuff I've ever seen. I highly suggest several of you check some of the Hollywood Blonde stuff out. You will not be disappointed. You gotta love the Hollywood Blondes. But nevertheless, they become Unified World Tag Team champions in World Championship Wrestling. And then World Championship Wrestling, as intelligent as they are, they split them up, and they go their separate ways, leaving Brian Pillman pretty much in his second abyss in the company, in which you have Steve Austin finally getting a big push in the company, at least supposedly big push, in which he will eventually capture the United States Heavyweight Championship for the first time in his career. He'll have some feuds with Ricky Steamboat and you know, so on and so forth, until he eventually leaves in 1995 after he's fired by Eric Bischoff. But Brian Pillman eventually comes back. I believe Brian suffered an injury in between that time span, between 1994 and 1995. But in 1995, he comes back, and he has this, I would say, this new age retro like 80s kind of like gimmick that they tried to bestow upon him, with a grunge like feel to it. I know that's kind of weird kind of combination, new age and the grunge, but that's kind of what they were doing with him. They had the whole music in the package and stuff, but it just wasn't working. And eventually you saw the evolution of the loose cannon gimmick that he will eventually play towards the end of his career and the end of his life start to form, in which he becomes a member of the Four Horsemen. And a very awkward member of the Four Horsemen. Not many people talk about Brian Pillman as a member of the Four Horsemen, but I thought he was a really good... Brian is a great wrestler, but I never really bought him as a horseman. Especially seeing him as a face for so many years on a singles capacity. We all know the great stuff he did as a heel with the Hollywood Blondes, but I think it was just WCW just putting stuff together and hoping that it would stick. Brian Pillman was not, he just did not feel like a horseman. It seemed extremely forced by the organization, and it probably was. But nevertheless, he is a part of the new Four Horsemen, the resurgence of the Horsemen. The crippler Chris Benoit, who comes over from ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling, comes in the fold. Brian Pillman comes in the fold, and of course you have your staples in the Enforcer Arn Anderson, as well as the Nature Boy Ric Flair. And Brian Pillman, like I said, just did not seem right that he was part of this faction. And eventually, I think World Championship Wrestling, I don't know if they knew that or what, but eventually, and when we go into 1996, Brian Pillman starts doing a lot of rogue-like things, and that will really start to be the antithesis of his loose cannon gimmick. I mean, just going off the wall, making off-ball comments, doing a lot of unpredictable stuff. It was probably a combination of him pitching the stuff to Eric Bischoff, and Eric Bischoff pitching some stuff to him, because at the time Eric Bischoff was doing a lot of cutting-edge things through producing television. And he was doing some really, really good stuff of fooling a lot of fans about what was going on in this product, and it kept the wrestling business really interesting. That's one thing that's missing today, the unpredictability factor that is missing in WWE and TNA. Everything is so obvious. You kind of know what's going to happen. With Brian Pillman, Brian was, and once again, as I mentioned earlier, Brian Pillman was a true innovator, and he was so ahead of his time on a lot of things he did. And just this loose cannon gimmick is one of them. Now, in February of 1996, the highly talked about stuff with Kevin Sullivan, I guess Brian was having some issues with Kevin Sullivan, or if it was all, I really don't know the entire story behind it. I don't know if we ever really know all the story behind it, but I guess he was having some issues with Kevin Sullivan, who was the booker of WCW throughout most of 96 and 1997, and basically he, Brian Pillman, speaking of specifically, had some sort of shoot-like stuff, I don't know, or it was a work, I still don't know to this day, because no one has really fully clarified it, but he has this strap match, supposedly with Kevin Sullivan, the Taskmaster Kevin Sullivan, in basically the Dungeon of Doom and Four Horsemen feud that had been going on for a while, which eventually continued on even after Brian Pillman left. But Brian, I guess, was supposed to leave WCW for a while, and then go to ECW, and then come back.